Hello, everybody. This is Mythical back again with more Andor, and again here with Connor.
Yeah,
we didn't
episode 2.
we didn't finish. We had so much to say. We couldn't get through all of it. There's so dense of a show. There's so many elements to talk about. So many character arcs. So many nuanced details. And things as large as like the scale of the world and how they develop it, and the politics of it, which we'll hopefully have time to touch on just a little bit because there is a lot there to unpack.
It's a lot of interesting sci-fi stuff, and we also I finished my second watch through. That was your third,
Yes.
So finished the show again
with some new ideas and new points of analysis. If we have time, we can just do a brief little details segment too. But we'll see what we can cover. We wanted to start with the ISB, Dedra, Partagaz, all them, because we didn't have time for that in the last segment because we had so much else to talk about, and I did want to highlight because
a competent villain that really helps to raise the tension in a lot of way.
Yes.
I feel like in a lot of shows you would have you usually have like a character trying to achieve a goal, and you have an incompetent boss that is there for you to hate. This wasn't really the case. We had Partagaz, who I did not pronounce that right.
Partagaz.
Who was like Partagaz.
It's all good.
Who is like he's that expects a lot from them, but like is very fair. And when he sees that Dedra actually has some good ideas about what she wants to pursue in trying to hunt down the rebellion, that like he gives her the go ahead.
Yeah. It's really interesting how he governs that chamber of all the officers. Because at first, the impression is given to the viewer that he kind of runs it like a dictatorship, and they all sort of fear him, which maybe to an extent there is that implicit sense of insecurity.
It's the Empire, I mean.
Yeah, he's a superior officer. They want to climb the hierarchical ladder, per se. And there's a lot of competition between officers in order to gain favor from Partagaz, from the Emperor, but also to advance one's own career. There's a bit of self-interest along with mindfulness of one's place in the structure, so it's kind of cool to see how Partagaz runs that. And at first it seems pretty standard bad guy trope, like, what do we do here at the ISB, and Dedra off naming the strait from the ISB, what do you call
the
it?
code, like their manual basically is like, yep, that is straight from the rule book and completely wrong.
Yep. Go ahead.
We're here to diagnose the disease and destroy it, cure it.
Yeah. Which, as a description of what is essentially like an investigative bureau, is a really interesting way to look at it. And I love the detail that in Marva's speech at the end of episode 12. Part of what she's saying about the Empire being like a rust that's corrupting everything, a disease that's at the center of the galaxy that's spreading everywhere. Ironic that the ISB considers themselves the cure, when in actuality their actions speak to the cognitive dissonance of that.
And I think that's very interesting. The Empire becoming so big, powerful that it becomes blind. That's even something Andor will talk about. That like they would never expect that the people would try to rebel against them or be organized. That they're too fat and happy.
Yeah, I love that line. It's so silly sounding, but it says a lot about their state. I remember from the trailer they edited the one officer guy from Coruscant with the engineer from Coruscant or wherever they're from in the Aldani episode with the eye. Just them like drinking out of a cup together, and I was like, that's funny edit. But it kind of, I guess, is an image that represents a whole. They're so content with their state of life, of their governments, of the galaxy, and the control that they have. And there's a lot of insecurity about when they don't, which is a really nice.
Yeah, when you get caught off guard.
Speaking of getting caught off guard, the interesting thing about the ISB that in storytelling you typically want to stay away from, but I think does work here given their function, is they're a reactionary force. They aren't necessarily they're not making acts or any sort of legislation themselves to bring about the end of the rebellion once they have reason to believe it exists. It's purely based on what does Andor do or what do the rebels do that they respond to.
Yeah.
Like Ferrex, the whole Ferrex situation prompts ISB response. A very small bit of responsibility taken under Blevin, who's in control of that sector. But then when Aldhani happens, it's like, total chaos.
It's an interesting spin on the word security, like the Imperial Security Bureau, I guess. Maybe the Imperial part speaks for itself, but that it's not trying to so much secure things as it is to go after security threats.
Yes. And as Cassian says in episode 9, oh no, it's episode 10, because it's right after the moment where Kino tells him there's like 12 guards on each level, and they're beginning
never more than 12.
They're beginning their planning stages of their escape plan. And he's like, why would they have killed all those men on level 2? What was the point of them doing that? And Kino was like, power. And Cassian's like, power doesn't panic. And that's exactly what the ISB does constantly. Their whole deal is obsession with control, and keeping things in order to the point where it is a bit insecure. It's a really interesting way to characterize your villains beyond just making them like, oh yeah, the rebels did this, well we're gonna do this, and whatever. There's nuance to it. They're real people, which I absolutely love that they did that. I think we talked about this too when we rewatched it, when they're responding to the rebel ship from Krieger getting caught. How Partagaz walks in. He's wearing like an overcoat. He has like his briefcase. I
really liked that you pointed that out. That just like they're people too. I mean, still in the Empire, but like, and like even when one of the first crises happened, that like you're all staying here until midnight and getting this done, and just like that, the people really devoted their time to their work. It was very interesting.
Yeah. Like they have lives. They're just coming right off the streets. They're, it's such a small, stupid thing to point out, but like it does add a lot to the presence of them as a faction. Lends to their personalities as characters, and it's just really neat that they would show that at all. Such a small detail to point out, I know, but I do really like their reactionary scene with Yularen.
That was a nice way of raising the stakes, like spoken directly with the Emperor. It's when like stuff's gotten very serious that they had to consult their monarch. Like,
yes, it's interesting they don't show him either. They never show Palpatine, and I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah,
I'm glad they don't, because it would take a lot of the nuance out of the show if he appeared. It would then feel like a cameo.
Yeah, it would be feeling like shifting the villain towards like the Empire, or like the Emperor himself, and not just like the overall Empire. Yeah, which I'm glad they didn't have like a scene with like Yularen talking with the Emperor, even if it's just a hologram.
Because I'm gonna make a Chernobyl comparison here, which I know you'll like. So example A of what they do with characters in this show when they react. The first thing they highlight is the confusion, the insecurity, as I keep saying. Obviously everybody in the ISB is very shaken up about Aldhani. Yularen himself seems a bit paranoid, but he has his composure kept. The moment that you show the Emperor, you're implying that he has a similar sort of response. So keeping him on the back burner, just mentioning his name, it still carries that weight of him being the main villain, the leader of this corrupt dictatorship, fascist organization. But it preserves that, and it still implies that, like, he's watching everything, but he has other matters to worry about, and this just happened to be of a scale that warranted his attention.
99 problems.
Yeah, but then you look at Chernobyl, where it depicts... who was in charge of the Soviet Union at the time? Terrible at this sort of history.
I cannot pronounce his name either. He's the guy with the birthmark on his head.
Yes. Because there's the scene where they're briefing him about the Chernobyl incident and what they're going to have to do to make up for it. And you watch like the light drain from his face multiple times as he's having to plan this out. My memory's a little foggy under the details of the scene, but I'm pretty sure it goes something along the lines of like, we're going to have to spend this much money or get this amount of labor.
Yeah, at first it's kind of just a small reaction. It's like, it's probably not a big deal. Like, that's the when they're like 3.6 Ronkin, not bad, not terrible. Yeah. And then like, of course it then gets worse. And like, again, they have to call up, I think it's Khrushchev, birthmark guy. It was that like we need like all of the lead in the Soviet Union, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, like they're willing to take the extra mile, but you can tell he is still like, oh damn, we got close to things getting really bad. And that's kind of the idea I think would happen to Palpatine if you brought him into this. Like, we don't want to give any more damage to Palpatine as a character and his integrity as this villainous presence by humanizing him too much, because he is essentially the devil.
Yeah.
So let's keep him as the devil and not make him feel relatable, because that's the one thing the ISB does get is relatability.
Yeah, he should be on top of it all for sure, but like there should be a distance between him and that. Like, yeah.
Absolutely. So with that said, part of guys love the guy, but Dedra is the real star of the show. And we're not going to hang on her for too long because we have a whole other list of things to talk about. But I just want to say the amount of, like, I don't want to say sympathy that the show builds for her, but like you're kind of watching her climb up the hierarchy, and like out of context, it's this militant leader in a fascist organization gaining influence from her superiors. Like, that's a very disturbing thing, but
you kind of want her to succeed, though. Like, she's such a good character that, like, yeah, get those rebels. Honestly, her characterization is very interesting, and just like her motive is really power.
Yes,
but that, like, it's a very nuanced power, and that, like, how she approaches that is very interesting.
And you sort of see, like, her disagreement with her other workmates. Why? I'm like really at a loss for words today.
She's willing to stand up for herself.
Yeah. She holds presence in a room, and you see her get comfortable in a room. The more as the show goes on, initially she's very like kind of jittery. She just sort of makes a remark or an argument without really providing like the evidence for it. It's just a conjecture, and Partagaz calls her out on her BS pretty soon. But I really like later on in the show when Blevin is accusing her of overstepping, and
she's like, I broke the rules, and like Partagaz gives her a pat on the back. It was like, I wish everyone had this enthusiasm for the work they do. And
he's so coy about it. I just love the performance. That is given by his actor. Just the characters, it's just great. But yeah, it's interesting to see Dedra also recognizing that with the audience. Like, oh damn, he just like approved of what I did. This is great. Like, it's a huge landmark for her.
And then like afterwards, she's like, watch your back. 'Cause again, this is the Empire. People like many were not happy that she spoke up like that and made everyone else look bad.
Absolutely.
It's still a fascist regime, and people are competing for power.
Yeah, it's so nice to see something like that in Star Wars, because usually it's just like, oh, this officer is mean and this officer is slightly less mean, so the mean officer is going to pick on the not as mean guy. And then that officer is probably either going to get force choked by Darth Vader or Kylo Ren or whoever, or thrown out a window, or whatever the punishment may be. And it's just, there's nothing to that beyond, they're dead. Like, I'm not taking a jab at Empire, because Empire has a reason for doing that, and it has a payoff to why Vader's killing the officers, and then the reason that he doesn't kill an officer at the end is actually almost more frightening than when he was killing them. But like every other instance of it, especially in the sequels, I feel like it just falls flat on its face every time they do it, because there isn't anything they're trying to say. They're just like, oh, character is crazy or mean or sadistic and doesn't like his men. Like,
there's more reasoning behind it. Right.
So with that said, I think we've given the ISB the attention they deserve.
Maybe a little bit of Syril, and just how he acts as a foil to Dedra.
A foil to Dedra, and I think to Andor as well. I did a little bit of side analysis myself, but let's start with Syril and Dedra, because that develops into a long-standing dynamic that might receive more development in season 2. Which is interesting.
It's really interesting with the ways they're similar, but the ways that they're different in just the amount of actual power they hold. Like, it's both of them want power for sure, and are pretty much willing to do whatever it takes to get it. And also both of them are maybe slightly arrogant in some ways. Syril's definitely I think what you would think about with like the arrogance and just like he doesn't really know how to talk to his men in that one awkward speech scene.
Yes.
That like he's kind of blinded to the fact of like of avenging the two Primor employees that died. That like there's times where he fails to really think things out, and I just think that that's an interesting way of adding flaws to his character. And then like we see Dedra, what are her flaws?
Oh, they're her rudeness, her abuse of her power and overreaching of her power is definitely...
Yeah, we see her like with some of the other like employees in the Empire is probably not a good word, but like she's like making people stay up all night to get this information on her desk by the end of the day. Yeah, definitely both of them are not people pleasers in any meaning of the word. That that aren't really concerned with talking to people and like reasoning with them. That like they want to accomplish a goal, and the goal is basically a higher ranking on the power system. But again, like we see Syril like 3 episodes in loses most of his power, and he's not very happy about that, and that like he wants back on the power train, and that like that leads him to start stalking Dedra.
The one thing I want to highlight about Syril, though, that does differentiate him from Dedra and even Cassian, to transition to that, is the reason he wants the power isn't for himself as much as it is for the sake of justice for his men that died. There's a sort of like vengeance that he's after. It's a purely like
it's not purely climbing
empathetic.
The ladder.
Yeah. It's more of like the power climb is a necessary evil to make sure that this doesn't get swept under the rug like thousands of other cases probably have. Like, whereas Dedra, it is purely about like the Empire brings a sort of sentiment of peace to the galaxy. Like there's an order when the Empire's in control, and like looking around the galaxy to planets like Ferrix where there's all these traditions she looks down on because it's sort of like chaotic, and there isn't really any purpose to it in her eyes. I think Syril might share that sentiment, but he definitely cares a lot about his pursuit of justice.
He's very much self-righteous in that,
Which is why when his men do die in episode 3 by the bomb that Luthen plants.
I love that scene of him just looking around shell-shocked and just look of distress on his face. I think was really well done.
It's such a well done scene. The way they frame it with the music,
oh my god,
the tone of it is very well managed. Mosk's reaction, trying to get him to move out of the area by screaming at him, "Sir, we need to get out of here!" Like it's very well handled, and that demonstrates Syril's priority is the pursuit of justice. Which I think is maybe a good segue into just briefly touching on how he's different from Cassian. Syril is very honest. He's shown to be empathetic of the people that he works with, the people who are protecting the order of the galaxy, and he isn't necessarily a self-sufficient guy. He relies on his team. He relies on his connections that he has to get places. Cassian is like the total opposite of that. Cassian is shown to be relatively apathetic to a lot of things. This whole arc is apathy towards stopping the Empire. He doesn't like the Empire. He's not thankful for his position in the galaxy. And, you know, that's something that Nemec doesn't understand. And why he wants to give him the manifesto, because like Cassian, he doesn't see a purpose to rebellion.
He kind of uses people in a way, and I think throughout the show, especially with the prison arc, I think that sort of changes, and maybe he gets better at working with people. Because like he owed a bunch of debt to a lot of people. That's established in the first episode. It's not like a crazy amount, but like some people were not very happy with him, and just like using people for things. Like in the heist arc, like we see he wants money. So I mean there's other reasons, but like that very much he's not in it for the cause or for the people in it. He's in it for an end goal. And like I think the way that the prison arc kind of changes that like now he needs others' help. That like he needs that if he's ever going to get out of there, like he needs to be able to work with people.
Yes.
And just like that shifting. I think there's more we could talk about it too. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I think it just lends to a more meta standard of the show's structure and how well that it controls what experiences he goes through that leads him to the logical conclusion at the end that he makes when he says to Luthen, like, oh, you either kill me or I join you. There isn't a way out of this here, because he has settled on the fact that the rebellion is what he realizes he's meant to have a stake in, I suppose.
Yes.
And before we touch into that, because I know...
Yeah, I love that point. There's a lot I want to say on it.
There's a lot to delve into there. It is worth also saying, and I think you highlighted it, Cassian's self-sufficiency, his independence, his refusal at first to rely on others. The Aldhani heist kind of puts a little pin in that, but it doesn't quite fracture that character. I guess you could call it maybe a flaw. I think it has its advantages for him, but as like looking at him
more of a trait then,
yeah, it's definitely something about him that is challenged by the show, and that Syril at the start is sort of the opposite of, and they sort of both kind of go different places from there. I just thought that was an interesting point, that he does sort of, through the prison experience, he has to rely on other people, because if they don't fulfill their quota by the end of the day and they don't come out on top, they all get shocked, and nobody wants to get shocked in that prison. It's a very painful experience. So fighting for food flavor rather in the prison kind of keeps him in line and slowly builds a sense of camaraderie.
And just like that the shift from like in the heist arc we see, and even in the arc before that, like we first see Luthen kind of trying to radicalize Andor, trying to get him into the rebellion, and he's very lukewarm, or even just know that like he hates the Empire, but he's not going to raise a gun to the Empire if it means he's going to die. Like he's still very much out for himself. We see then Nemik trying to radicalize him in that fact, like get him like the Empire is this evil force that like it would, I think it said, or maybe I was just thinking about that, like it would be immoral to do nothing.
Yes.
That the non-action is actually like that's, and I think Luthen sometimes uses that reasoning that like it would be wrong to do nothing, that like something needs to be done. And then in the prison arc, we see like a whole reversal that now if Andor, I think I was saying a little bit about this before, like if Andor wants to get out of prison, he needs to work with others. He needs to almost convert others into this rebellion. Not like I think it relates to the wider rebellion, but for now, just this rebellion out of the prison that he needs to convince Renault, or the Kino. He needs to convince Kino, who is someone that, again, really just wants to get out of here. He doesn't want to jeopardize the fact that he could be getting out of prison. And then, of course, they find out no one's leaving.
Yeah.
And that, like, Andor ends up really setting the fire for, like, the escape from the prison. And I think that's just a very... And then, again, that ends with, like, in the last episode, him talking to Luthen that, like, he's finally ready to join the rebellion.
Yeah. And one point I'd like to add to that is the sentiment of how people view Aldhani, being though he was involved in it, nobody knows he was involved in it. So, like, his mother says, did you hear about what happened on Aldhani? You know, those brave people did this wonderful thing to put a stick in the eye of the Empire. And Cassian's like, I was there, but she doesn't know that. And that kind of maybe is like a step forward towards his end goal of an arc, where maybe he's seeing like, wow, that small action that I did for money really did have an impact on the people who believe that the Empire can be stopped. And then sort of the dramatic reversal of that in like the next episode, or it might even be, it is the next episode, because that's episode 7 where they reunite, and then episode 8 when he's in the prison, he's talking to the prisoners, and they're like, there was this, we heard rumors of this rebel event that caused our resentencing. So, like, how could the Empire do this to us? And, like, why would the rebels do something that we would be blamed for?
I love that wider story, though, and just, like, even though we're really always focusing on Andor and the other characters, just how much of the galaxy the story really covers, and we really get a sense of, like, the actions Andor has made has dramatically affected the rest of the galaxy.
Yes. And it sort of all bleeds back to the sentiment that I think Marvel has taken a lot of hits for. The consequences of what the heroes do. The first Marvel movie to ever address that was Civil War, and I think it's one of the better Marvel movies, definitely within the top 3, probably.
Yeah, I really like it.
Not just because of that, because of a lot of other reasons, but we don't have time for that. But it addresses Sokovia, it addresses what happens in Avengers 1 in New York. I believe they mention helicarriers crashing into Triskelion, or whatever the hell it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And like all those events being moments where superheroes tried to intervene, but people still died. And then the question of like, does intervention sometimes produce worse consequences than inaction?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting theme.
Mm-hmm.
That like people are going to get hurt even if you're trying to do the right thing, and how do you grapple with that?
It's like the trolley problem. It's, do you stand by and let people die but not have the blood on your hands? Or do you get involved and try to save a life but then condemn everybody to death and then have their blood on your hands because you couldn't help them? It's a very interesting moral dilemma because it reduces the problem to the self, and it takes away the elements of how other people feel. It's just purely now your responsibility when you get involved. And it's really cool that Andor does sort of explore like who's hurt by that. The prisoners in Narkina 5 being the prime example, but I really do like that they do touch on that just a wee little bit. So yeah, that is Andor, Syril, Dedra, and Luthen, and
a little bit more Luthen, because I want to connect this. That like we talked about Luthen in the last episode, and just like, again, this is someone who's willing to sacrifice things for the Empire. And like him and Andor, that really comes to fruition in like that last scene. What Andor is doing is that like he's showing Luthen he's ready to sacrifice himself for the rebellion, and that like he's like, shoot me or take me in. That like I think that's what Luthen needed to see, that he's not a liability. He's someone who is ready to put down his life for the rebellion, and that like Luthen probably saw some of himself in that.
Absolutely. That's Luthen's whole deal, is that sentiment that he said in his monologue, but is represented through everything he does. The sense of my life being a predictable cost and the avenues I'm trying to pursue. And seeing Andor reflect that, like you said, it is the moment where Luthen, like, you see the smile break across his face. He knows he's finally won Andor over, and all that effort he did cultivating that rebel spirit in him back in episode 3, it's finally paid off. Yeah,
he's ready.
Maybe not at his hands necessarily, but he has.
It's a journey.
Yeah, it is definitely a journey. It is probably the best ending the show could have for what it's trying to do, because it shows everything had a reason for happening. This wasn't just a bunch of events they wanted to have happen. Like all of this has shaped Cassian into who he is and who he'll become all the way in Rogue One, and now all we have left to see is how do we get to Rogue One? What other development? I guess K2SO we have yet to,
and like what happens with Luthen and Dedra. And are we ever going to find out about Andor's sister and like his whole backstory there? In fact, like there's a couple backstories I'd really be interested in. Like we were talking about how like Syril has motives and why he has those motives, but Dedra, we almost know nothing about her backstory.
Yeah, because we jump to her in media res, the term for like right in the middle of the action. They're the ISB's direct response to Ferrix.
Yeah.
Or rather, like a slew of things, including Ferrix. So we don't get that context, which I think is an interesting but intentional detail, because starting off the show with background on Dedra and the ISB and Mon Mothma, as well as everything else the first 3 episodes explored, that's too.
I'm glad they didn't start with that, but if later maybe we'll see something.
Absolutely,
be interesting.
Absolutely. And to that end, I think you mentioned Kenari. Perhaps it might be worth exploring just very briefly some other criticisms we have of the show.
Yeah.
We don't want to create the image that the show is perfect, because it isn't, but it is definitely very, 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 very good.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to reflect on any piece of media is not perfect as much as we might love it.
Yes.
Like, I think it's important to be able to recognize those flaws, just to to not be blindly in love with a show just like adds character.
The moment that you become obsessed with something to the point where you refuse to accept what's wrong with it in some areas, that's taking it too far. That's definitely a problem Star Wars sometimes has with some of its products. Example A, Revenge of the Sith. People love that movie to death. It has so many issues. And it just doesn't look very good in terms of the camera movement. It's a lot of still shots of just people talking in rooms, and it kind of flips between those. The lighting is dog shit in some scenes. It's so like bright for no reason. Like in the Jedi Council chamber, for instance.
Yeah.
It's so overly bright. Why? I know it's like the green screen technology was still being worked out, but for all of those issues, you get the Duel on Mustafar.
Yeah.
You get Order 66. You get the memes, you know?
It's been memed to death, but like the different characters, and like I think Anakin's story is there are some flaws maybe with the dialogue, but I think it is a very good story.
And we owe it to Clone Wars for adding more nuance to that, because it definitely did add the necessary context to justify why he'd be upset at the Jedi's hypocrisy. And the movies didn't. It was one of those things they probably should have covered more, but they couldn't with what everything else they were trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
But to make that point made, Revenge of the Sith is a fun movie to watch. It's definitely good, but I don't want to ever say it's perfect or even necessarily amazing. It's definitely. It's a good movie, and it's always been one of my favorites. Yeah. But even the more I look at it, I'm like, ooh.
I still have the 4.5-hour version if you want to watch that sometime. It's got the deleted scenes and Clone Wars spliced in.
I remember Anakin doing the droid impression. That's a deleted scene. I'm glad isn't.
I don't know if that's in it, but there are a couple, like some of like the Senate chamber stuff, and like Mon Mothma is in it.
Oh yeah,
just
the
interesting
delegation of like 400 or 200 or whatever.
Yeah, and just like how it's trying to touch on like the politics in Star Wars.
They do add a couple scenes with Palpatine and that like rebel delegation that with Anakin kind of perched by Palpatine's side, which is a really nice foreshadowing, like the fact that it's come to the point where Palpatine has a Jedi advisor overlooking political affairs and senators. That's a really neat detail. If you can't tell, I have bias towards Anakin. He's my favorite character. So anytime we start talking about Anakin, my face will light up. But moving away from that, the point made, I think that same sentiment is shared towards films like TLJ. There are a lot of people who are avid about the film, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there are a lot of warranted criticisms against that. There's a lot of warranted criticisms against Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
There's a lot of warranted criticisms against A New Hope, even.
But like when Return of the Jedi came out, like that's a very big deal. Like for us who weren't really alive at that time, that's sometimes lost on us. But that like seeing Luke all in black and like thinking, like, is he turning to the dark side? Like, what is happening here? Like, still, like, some of, like, the hype around that was, like, very real at the time. It was very interesting.
And the first scene of him is him force choking two of the guards at Jabba's palace. Like, that's very dark to bring your hero down to that level. It is a shame maybe they didn't develop it as much as they could have because of everything else they were doing with that movie. But, you know, it is, I think, one of the films responsible for the term blockbuster, because there was literally like blocks of people waiting in line just to see the damn thing. That's how popular it was and how hyped
big deal.
up, you know. But to that end, just a quick little tangent, and let's steer back to Andor, because we were in the midst of discussion. One thing I would like to talk about in its own segment, or just on my channel myself, is like objective criticism versus subjective criticism. Things we like versus things that are problems with the film, whether we like them
very
or not.
Inherent problems where it makes it a worse experience.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not gonna call out any here because I would need to prepare notations about that.
Definitely come to that argument prepared.
Yeah, but in Andor, I can cite a few off the top of my head, and the one we've talked about a lot. Luthen going to Ferrix in episode 12.
It's very convenient that everyone shows up on Ferrix, and it even just like that last scene again, like it proves for some very nice character moments, and the interactions like Syril and Dedra and Andor like coming back to his friends, and like, but some of it is very too convenient, specifically I think with Luthen, that this is someone who's very paranoid and yes has been known to do things that he knows he shouldn't, even if they're risky, and doing them anyway. But going to the planet where you know there's going to be ISB and someone who, yes, you need to get rid of because you think they're a security threat, Andor, but like still putting yourself in that situation, I'm kind of wrestling with whether or not that was realistic of his character or not.
Yeah, me too. Here's what I've noticed. So whenever it comes to a character decision, from my experience of analysis, the first thing to do is break down context. I'll give you an example, and this might get contentious, so bear with me, listeners, my dearest. But TLJ Luke Skywalker walking up to his nephew while he's asleep and contemplating, possibly entertaining the thought of striking him down. It has been dissected online to death from both perspectives. A lot of valid points have been thrown around. Here's where context comes in. So the main defense is Luke Skywalker loses his cool in episode 6 when Vader mentions turning his sister to the dark side. That's the moment he snaps, because it's the thought of something terrible happening to someone he loves, who's very close to him. Plus the repeated mentions by the Emperor to say your friends are screwed. I've got it. I've got this all sealed. There's nothing you can do except watch on and join me. So Luke eventually comes to this crescendo point where he pulls out his weapon and, viciously attacks Vader. The music swells into this sort of choral sort of melody representing the Sith, and like it all leads to Vader's hand getting cut off, and Luke then realizing the error of his ways, throwing away his lightsaber, calling himself a Jedi, whatever. People say that's proof that he would tap into the dark side to, when the thought of someone he loves gets related to their harm or death or whatever.
Yeah, even Luke's not a perfect Jedi.
Here's the problem with that defense. The context. Where is Luke when that happens to him? He is in the throne room on the Death Star while a battle for the life of the rebellion and the fate of the galaxy is happening out the window. His friends are out of his reach on a planet, and their fate is completely indeterminate to him. People are literally dying by the Death Star super laser at this point. Like, it's a very violent, gory scene when you think about it. Not to mention, the whole time this sequence has been going on, we've been seeing this buildup of the Emperor and Vader sort of like tearing at his moral fiber. And if anything, I would argue it demonstrates Luke's resilience as a character, how much he's able to resist that temptation. And it's only after being pried at for so long and having all this moment of contemplation to think, he finally snaps. But it takes buildup, and it takes a lot. And even then, the consequences and the stakes for that happening to Leia are very real, because in the last movie we saw Vader torture Han. We saw him take Luke's friends and, threaten to capture them.
Yeah, it's the Empire after all.
Right. When it comes to Ben, we haven't seen him do anything yet. We don't even have context for who he is or who Snoke is or anything. So context is immediately unequivalent. So you can't really compare those two instances. So to that end, I guess to bring it back to Andor, when Luthen goes to Ferrix for the first time, he's still anonymous. The Empire doesn't know him as Axis. The ISB hasn't investigated him. And he's going alone. He's just pretending to be a civilian slipping in to meet Andor and whatever. Now the Empire have branded him as Axis. They've tied him to the stealing of multiple bits of Imperial technology, and they have reason to believe he might even be responsible for events like Aldhani. And at one point they thought it was Krieger, but the idea is still in the air that there is an Axis. So putting himself in the vicinity of the ISB might be a bad idea.
They're there because they're looking for specifically Andor, but they're very much here to hunt down rebel activity. That's a hot spot right there. It's not some place you want to go to. If Andor knew what was going to be happening, I think he probably still would have gone, but he might have hesitated.
He might have, yeah. And the other thing is, their plan was capture Cassian and then have him reveal who Axis was.
Yeah.
Now, I guess at this point, maybe we're treading into territory where Luthen couldn't possibly know that, and therefore it might justify why he went, because maybe he heard of Marva's funeral and he, like, wanted to see the action it could stir, but he couldn't have possibly known it was going to turn into this rebel uprising moment.
Yeah,
he didn't know about
and
the
like
speech.
again, you pointed the scene out to me that like he is firsthand seeing the actions that like he wants to come to pass, like watching people die. Mm-hmm. That like that's very
yeah
consequences of your actions.
I do think that despite the possible detriment that decision for him to go to Ferrix may have, the show's payoffs for him doing so are far greater,
yes,
and they do outweigh
I would
that.
agree.
So it's again,
forgivable.
Yeah, it is a forgivable offense if it is indeed an offense, and we're not just like overanalyzing it or picking it apart too deeply. Like I can see what they were going for. That shot of the city full of screams, smoke in the sky, blaster fire, and Luthen looking on, kind of with a sense of, like he's not necessarily proud of it, but at the same time, it's validated what he's believed about what the rebellion could be. People can rise up. They just need the motivation. They need a figure to rally behind. They need a reason to believe the Empire is going to trample them down. And now here it is, but at what cost? And he's finally seeing the manifestation of that cost before his eyes. Plus the ending scene with Andor, like it all cancels out the offense, I think. So yeah, that covers, I think, everything we wanted to talk about Luthen.
Yeah.
And while we still have a little lick of time, you want to touch on sci-fi politics.
I want to talk about sci-fi, yeah. And that, like, Star Wars in general is very much a blend between sci-fi and fantasy. Like, I always like to call it sci-fi, but I don't think that definition would be completely true. It's very much a blend of the two. Like, we have the forces of good and evil. We've got swords. Like, there's very much of that fantasy aspect. The Force is a very fantastical force.
Yeah,
but
the light and dark themes too. Yeah.
And not only because it's set in like the future, or I guess it's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I guess it's set in the past. It's very interesting that like sci-fi, I was thinking about it, can be broken down into two components, and like part of that is like the thinking about what could be given technology, and like thinking about like the different consequences that has for people. And another element of it, I think, is a sort of political commentary that in many sci-fi shows, books, that we see a struggle for power between different forces, and that very clearly in Star Wars, we were talking about Episode 4, that like it was very much echoing some of the thoughts at the time, like the Vietnam War, that we see that George Lucas has straight out said that like the rebellion was modeled after the Viet Cong, like, and we see them as the good guys in Star Wars, that it's very easy to identify them, that they're fighting against an authoritarian regime. So that in many ways politics serves as a sort of commentary, and that like Andor as a show was very much not focused on the fantasy side of Star Wars. It was very much focused on the sci-fi side, and that we really saw like building up the Empire as a very scary authoritarian regime again. Yeah. That like something to be scared of, and that like you're supposed to be. That, and you're supposed like, and like the good and bad isn't as cut and dry as in some of other Star Wars content, but that like some of the different messages that it's bringing up, that again, it's like immoral to do nothing against an authoritarian regime, that a regime that is condoning evil against others, and that like I just think some of those aspects were very different, and that like it is still at the core root like part of Star Wars, that the commentary on like authoritarianism is very interesting.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to interject real quick to reflect the Viet Cong and also the influence from the Revolutionary War for the OT.
Yeah.
The prequels, I think they deserve a pat on the back for this.
Yeah.
The Battle of Geonosis that begins the Clone Wars is a dramatic inversion of the opening of Empire Strikes Back with the Empire approaching Hoth, landing with their walkers and crawling towards the rebel base and everything, driving them off world. It's always a detail I've liked that George Lucas does that with the structure, and that's something we can talk about in more depth another time, because it's a beautiful, beautiful storytelling thing. But the politics side of it, we see now the Republic is framed as this imperial force, but it's not framed in a negative light. The Confederacy of Independent the Confederacy of Independent Systems is quite literally supposed to parallel the American Civil War. It's literally a sect of the galaxy that's broken off from Republic control, and now they're being framed as like the villains because it's the Trade Federation, Nute Gunray, the droids, Count Dooku obviously is a Sith Lord, but it's not necessarily to add negative commentary about like the Civil War per se, as it's citing it as this is like the historical influence to it, just to add another layer of depth to that faction.
Like, sci-fi, like in a political sense, very much relies on like what's happened and it, like what could be, and like identifying problems with things. Like again, like in a lot of Star Wars, like the prequels and Andor, like we see the death of democracy. We see like a political system crumbling. In like the Senate is full of, like in Andor's, probably even before that, is full of very corrupt people who are out for power. And that we see saints almost okay, maybe Mon Mothma's not a saint, but we see people still
not anymore.
Not anymore. I like how they characterized her, though.
I do too.
But just seeing people still trying to fight against that it's very much a struggle for different political beliefs.
Yes. I believe Padme was like the epitome of that. She was like the pure figure.
Maybe she's closer to a saint then.
Probably. I mean, like, not that she was flawless either, but what she represented and what she believed was, I think, maybe the seed for the rebellion, which is a bit ironic.
This is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause. It's
ironic that she married Anakin and becomes this fascist, figure for the Empire. And then, their offspring literally being the next to determine the fate of the galaxy. Like, it's a really, again, the storytelling of the first 6 movies is so tightly with those sorts of threads. And you just gotta love. It's so fun to analyze sometimes. Like, look past the dialogue and all the shifty stuff I mentioned earlier. Like
what it's saying.
It's pure. And Andor does nothing but contribute to that nuance, I think, for all the better.
It does some of the politics better than the prequels, for sure.
Oh,
it's very much well thought out, I think.
Absolutely. I finally am beginning to love the world of the original trilogy more than I used to, because I always liked the prequel trilogy world a lot. Like, it was great with what the Clone Wars did with the politics of it and everything, but now the original trilogy is being made more interesting retroactively by Andor, based on the merit of, like, look at what ends the Empire is willing to take, what the Rebellion's willing to do, etc.
A show being good is cool, but when it's able to enhance other parts of that wider story, that's when you know you've really made a good piece of content.
Absolutely.
When it's not taking away from anything, it's really enhancing that, like, building those characters and their motivations and connecting them with their other pieces of content in a way that isn't fan servicey, that they're there for a reason, and like the effects they have are very much important to the wider story.
It's that's when you know you've done something right. And I do think that for Star Wars, that might be a first for Disney. And again, this might be me going out on a limb here, but I don't believe anything that they've made with the IP has enhanced the existing stuff to this degree. At least not to this degree.
Yeah.
I think you could make an argument for The Mandalorian. Maybe. Post-Return of the Jedi period's pretty dull right
it's
now.
Definitely, it could use some work, I think, but The Mandalorian's done some of the building up and just adding of context.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, I can't say really filled that gap in quite well.
I wish it did.
I do too. It should have. It had no right to not. I mean, especially...
You were the chosen one.
Especially given how built up it was for years, the rumors, and just with Andor being a show nobody gave 2 shits about for the longest
It's crazy.
time. And now all of a sudden, look where we're at. I mean, maybe we're a minority in saying Andor is as good as it is, but I don't believe that that makes it not as good as it is, because we've looked so deeply at what makes it so coherent, how well written it is, how strong the characters are. The visuals are very great.
Yeah.
The cinematography, which we didn't really touch on
some of the different scene transitions.
Yeah, the scene transitions and the way shots are framed and the camera movement, the blocking of the actors is actually really, really good. And that's
the use of space and how it really builds different environments and different feels, and how the music contributes to that. Very well crafted. Yeah,
it's just a very nice, thought out, coherent, and intentional show. It means to tell a story.
It's not just Tatooine again.
Thank God we're free until the next Mandalorian season, and we probably will go back there again, I'm sure. But you know what?
I'm hopeful. I really hope it'll be fun.
I want it to be really good. I'm interested to see where it goes. But for Andor's sake, any final thoughts? Any last minute character commentary? Any last minute themes or dialogue or just a quick touch on a scene? Anything at all before we wrap this up that you want to say? If while you look, I can.
If you want to say something,
add a bit of commentary. I do just want to say that while the show has a lot of great scenes, and I wouldn't necessarily say there's a single scene that works to its detriment, there's a lot of really underrated scenes that I think don't get as much praise as they do. And I don't know if I mentioned it before, but in episode 2, the scene with Marva and Cassian, where we see them interact for the first time in the show, he comes back from lying everywhere. And the scene opens with an establishing shot of Marva saying to B2, like, don't talk yet, keep it down for a minute, to imply that she is setting something up to be revealed later in the scene. Your classic, like, Chekhov's gun sort of maneuver with the writing. And then Cassian walks in, he does his bit about, trying to build up his alibi, and Marva's playing along with it, and then she's eventually just like, read it, B. And we get the message about him being wanted and everything, and the tone shift is just... It's natural, it happens, and you see the insecurity of Cassian as he starts pacing around a lot. He has like a control of the space he's in, while Marva's sitting in the chair, but we know Marva has more authority than him, despite how much authority he's attempting to demonstrate. It shows the dynamic of the mother and the son.
And that's similar to Syril and his mother, and how that dynamic works out.
Exactly.
How, like... She definitely has the authority, and he's very much afraid to stand up against her.
Exactly.
And I really like the one scene where she keeps digging into him, and he's like, I got a promotion. And she's like, oh, I knew you could do it, my little son. I'm so proud of you. And just like that complete reversal.
After just roasting him for 3 minutes straight. Yeah.
How manipulative she is of him, and just his rebellion against her. Like, he runs off with some of her money and buys a ship to go see Andor, and just how dedicated he is.
Yes.
And like, I think it plays into his motive kind of the self-righteous part, but him also kind of trying to prove something to himself and to his mother. That I think is a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it's so cool how much the show can say about two characters we've never seen interact by their interaction without bringing up...
There's so many scenes like that,
Because you know that trope Star Wars does where it's like, oh, I remember when we fought this thing like a couple of years ago. You know, the classic, like, you remember when we fell into that nest of Gundarks, like in Attack of the Clones. Like, that trope of explaining... the Clone Wars were fought by the Jedi Knights, and your father was one of them. Like, it's the way to give the audience the catch-up. But Andor doesn't ever really do that.
Yeah, it's more in how they interact with each other that we really get a sense for backstory.
Yes.
We talked about it last episode, but again, with Andor and the minor guy, what's his name? Brasso, that sounds right.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's another great one, too.
Yeah, and they're not talking about their backstory. They're just talking to each other, and it's very much, you get the sense of two friends.
Yeah, or Luthen and Mon Mothma in episode 4. That's also one of my favorite scenes of this show. She walks into the store, and there's this like playful sort of banter between them that gives a sense that there's comfortability. But the moment they go into the back of the store and we see that camera flick transition that we can't stop loving,
and Luthen and his assistant, and how she's very much looking after him to make sure he doesn't screw up, even though he is the authority figure, that she's not going to let him slip up. That she's very much respected too, and she has her very important own part to play.
Yeah, she holds him to accountability, which is something he definitely needs. And seeing Mon Mothma and Luthen sort of actually be at odds with one another, despite having the same sentiments about the rebellion. Mon Mothma is more hesitant because of her vulnerability, given her profession as a senator, knowing that she's constantly being watched, and there's this pressure on her. And it follows her throughout the rest of the show after that. It never gets to a point where it dies down. Every conversation she has to be mindful of who's going to hear it, or if she's going to make the wrong facial expression and slip up, and like if she's not pretending to be happy around her daughter will catch on to the fact that
she hides her feelings so well with her smile.
Yeah, props to I believe the actress's name is Genevieve O'Reilly. She's been doing Mon Mothma in Rogue One and Rebels.
Next time I'm going to write down all the characters' names. I'm not going to mess around with forgetting names again.
Yeah, that was one thing that helped. When I watched the show, I took notes the first 2 times I watched it, and that's how I learned all the characters' names, because I always struggle with names in shows like this.
I can barely remember real people's names.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, forget it when it comes to something that's not even real, but the show does, when you know who everybody is, and you can actually like process what they're doing.
Getting a sense for the character. I don't have a problem with that. And in a show like Andor, I think it's done so well. You get a sense for their motivations, and it's pretty clear to see where they, even if it is morally gray, like where they fall.
Absolutely. Do you have any other final thoughts?
I think we've wrapped it up pretty nicely.
All right, I agree. If we ever have any other thoughts, maybe we'll make a smaller segment or something. But in terms of our large-scale review, this has been pretty introspective. I think we covered
lots of things to think about.
The shape. How could I forget?
No, the shapes.
How could I forget?
Oh my god.
Oh my god. Okay, so audience, geometry is a beautiful thing in film. As a film student myself, I constantly love to see shapes used in shots, and Andor has this little tidbit where it uses like octagons and septagons and
occasionally nonagons.
Like 7, 8, 9 sided figures, basically that all elicit the same effect. And it's this motif that they use to frame characters within. Cassian in episode 3, when he's a kid in a Canary flashback, begins this introduction of the visual imagery as he walks into the crashed ship on his planet to see what's up, I guess. And it's symbolic of him sort of entering the fray of whatever the shape means. And I'm going to leave it ambiguous for a minute as I introduce the other uses of it up until that point. It's used to frame a variety of characters. Luthen's shop has a window that's hexagonal. Maybe not quite the shape, but it does resemble it, so it elicits a feeling of like, oh, it's kind of a similar place of mind, but he's sort of able to dodge the effect of it. Cyril's office desk when he gets the new job is
and just seeing all of those office desks.
Yes. Oh, it's such a wonderful commentary about the monotony of office life and everything. Mon Mothma's home has that door frame of like I think it's like a 10-sided figure.
Yeah, and she even talked about like that she doesn't own the place and she's not really allowed to change anything about it, which is very interesting for like the underlying themes, I think.
I never noticed that. Yeah. That's cool.
That like the government's paying, or her home planet's paying for it. She has to live there.
That is fascinating. I never noticed that.
And like it's got nice views too. Like it's a nice place, but it's still where we're leading to.
Which is what I was just going to say, a prison, because Narkina 5 is shaped as a 7-sided figure. It elicits this sense of the enclosure with many faces, or many sides, really, to be mathematically accurate. It has many sides, but they're all... It frames the thing within and keeps it trapped in an enclosure. So Mon Mothma is sort of a prisoner of this life of having like a double life, where on one side she's the happy, chirpy senator who's trying to do the right thing. but in reality, she's funding this whole rebel operation.
Yeah, huge.
Syril being sort of trapped under the boot of society after he screwed up on Ferrex, and like he's been trying to regain his status and pursue justice, but just the monotony of this system and how indifferent everybody else is to the prospects he's pursuing. It's a prison. Cassian sort of enters the prison of this life of constantly being under watch by the Empire. It's kind of interesting that lines up with about the time where the Republic to Empire transition occurs. So it's like the beginning of this whole process. So Narkina 5 is literally a prison of this shape.
And then we see them leaking out.
Yes, which is one of the most beautiful visual images in film I've seen in recent times. All the prisoners swimming out of the Narkina prison.
What was that Nakim said? I think there was Nemec. There was a specific line.
Something along the lines of fascism or control by an authoritative power is unnatural. It breaks, it leaks. It can't contain freedom because freedom is a natural sentiment that is among people.
Those underlying political commentary again that like humans are meant to be free and that you can only control someone for so long until they break out of their prison.
Exactly. And that we see the payoff to all of that as if Narkina 5 wasn't enough. In episode 12, when Cassian is listening to that Nemec's recording of his manifesto, he's shown in the ship that his parents flew him out of Canary on, the crash one where he held the NS-5 or whatever Starpath unit. He's framed looking out into the space of Ferrex while it's raining, and it's just him against the void around him, but the openness is sort of symbolic of like this is his chance to, he's really committing to the rebellion, and that rebellion is the key to escaping the shape. Of all things, you'd think rebellion would keep you there longer, but sticking up and making the stand is what breaks you free.
One way out.
Oh, that's it right there.
I think that's a good place to end it.
I think it's awesome. So I don't like to do final ratings because as much as I love to give things numbers,
good or bad, this is good.
Just
if you have to think about it, it's not good.
Yeah, exactly. If you haven't watched it and you've made it through 2 podcasts worth of information about it,
and I know you're out there. I know there's people.
There are people who would do that. Just watch it. Watch all of it. It's so good.
Still so good. Even
trust me.
Having watched it once and watching it again, and the things you pick up on are great. I honestly enjoyed my second watch through even more than my first.
Yeah, I enjoyed each progressive watch through and up to the third just as much, if not more, than the last. So it's definitely. I might even watch it a 4th or 5th time.
I might need to watch Chernobyl again.
Maybe, yeah. Honestly, that would probably be worth doing because it's similar tone, but. That's all we got to say for Andor. We've passed the hour threshold, so it's definitely a good time to wrap it up.
Thank you for having me once again.
Of course. This was a pleasure. We'll have to keep doing this with other things.
We've got some ideas of things we might want to cover.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. We'll just make content when it comes out, so I'm not going to spoil anything quite yet. Yeah. We'll see where it goes.
It's in the works.
It is in the works, and if for whatever reason that doesn't transpire, maybe we can talk about Chernobyl or some more just basic like film construction stuff. I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see where it goes. Thank you for tuning into this Andor podcast thing. Hope you enjoyed.
Have a fantastic day.
Yes, emphasize that. Have a wonderful day. Peace out, and
see you later.